All right, we're on to our last lecture on significant figures. Last one we talked about like how you can figure out how many significant figures in a number. And again, kind of the goal of that is now we're going to start looking at, well, when we do calculations, which we're going to be doing all semester, not every day, but a lot of days we'll be doing calculations. Understanding sig figs is going to help us understand how to round our answers correctly. So that's really what the focus is of this last part 2C of our lecture. Let's start off with a quick review about sig figs and numbers. All right, so we already talked about these rules. Just to briefly remind you, any digit that's not a zero counts. Any digit that's not a zero, a 2, a 5, a 6, a 7, it fits in this category of being a sig fig. If you're a zero, it can get a little complicated. Leading zeros at the beginning of a number, they start the number. Never, never, never count. Leading zeros never count. Zeros in the middle of a number, those are called captive zeros. They always, always, always count. And then finally, zeros that are at the right-hand side of a number, those are called trailing zeros. They may or may not count. They only count if there's a decimal in the number. If there's a decimal in the number, you count them. All right, so the beginning, I'm trying to get this right on the camera, right? Where would the beginning of a number be when you're looking at, I don't know, mirror image things messing me up. All right, if you're at the beginning of a number, never ever count. In the middle, you count them, you count them, you count them. At the end of a number, you never ever count them. Or you might count them if there's a decimal, I should say. So beginning, never count. Middle, always count. And then at the end of a number, they only count if there's a decimal. All right, so with that quick review, let's look at how we can use this idea to decide how to round our answers. And there's going to be two rules for rounding that are based on these ideas. Rule number one has to do with what happens when you multiply or you divide. If you're doing a math problem for whatever reason, I ask you to do some math problem in this class, and after you did the math involved multiplying or dividing, and I said, yeah, that's great, you got the answer, but I need that answer rounded. If you need to round it, you would look at the numbers you're given, find the number with the least amount of sig figs, find the number with the least amount of sig figs that you're using, round to the same number of sig figs in your answer. So find the number that you're using with the least amount of sig figs, round to the same amount of sig figs in your answer. All right, let me show you a couple examples. So let's say for whatever reason I'm doing this math problem. 55.60 and I'm multiplying it times 0.00781. And I say, hey, do that and not only tell me the answer, tell it to me rounded correctly. Well, the first thing you have to do is get out your handy dandy calculator and type it in. Now, you might want to follow along with this at home, make sure that you're getting the same numbers as me. So I'm going to go ahead and type it in. 55.60 times 0.00781. And this is what your calculator should be showing you. All right, let me write it down. I hope you're seeing that. All right, so your calculator should have said this. And let me tell you something. Your calculator doesn't know a darn thing about sig figs. So that's where you have to come in to do the rounding part. All right, so your calculator will not round automatically. All right, so let's look at the numbers we're using and how many sig figs are in them. Because the rule says go with the least amount you find in those numbers in your answer. So 55.60. How many sig figs are in that number? There's 4. Trailing zero with the decimal counts. 4 sig figs. How about in 0.00781? The leading zeros don't count. 3 sig figs. All right. Now, if I look at my answer on the end, I have to figure out how many sig figs are in that number. So the way I'm going to figure out how many sig figs are in that number, or I should be keeping, I should say, is I'm going to look at how many I used. 4 sig figs, 3 sig figs, you go with the least. You want 3 sig figs in your answer. So that means you would have to round after the, well, let's say it this way. You'd round between the who and the what. You'd round between the 4 and the 2. You need to round right here. Now this is a 2. So we'll leave that 4 alone. So it's going to be rounded correctly, 0.434. Look at how many sig figs I gave you. You keep the least amount in your answer. All right, let's do another one. Let's do another one. We're going to do a couple of these. All right, so let's do another one. Let's do, let's do this one. B. Let's say I wanted to do, I'm doing some math problem in class, and I'm doing this number, 8.405 times 0.0072000. All right, and I want to know the answer. So first thing I'll do, type in my calculator, just like you would any old time in your life, right? Probably can't do that in your head, I'm guessing. And your calculator spits out this number. Let me write it down. Hopefully you're getting your calculator to work for you. If you're having calculator issues, you can always ask me about that too. Sometimes that can throw people off. Your calculator should give you this number. I hope. Did you get that number? I hope you did. Now, once you get that, you got to round it. So you're going to look at how many sig figs are in your numbers. You're going to give me the least amount you see in your answer. In 8.45, how many sig figs? There's 4. Captive counts. In 0.0072000, how many sig figs? Leadings don't. Trailing with the decimal do. There are 5. Oh, I got to switch pins. 5 sig figs. The trailing decimals, those last 3 count. Okay, so how many should be in your answer? 4 and 5? You go with 4. You go with 4. So if I want to have 4 in my answer, I would go over to the third sig fig. This 0 is not a sig fig, it's a leading 0. Sig fig number 1, sig fig number 2, sig fig number 3, sig fig number 4. I need to round between the 1 and the 6. So I'd round right here. And this is a 6. So that means I would have to change the 1. I'd go up. Should be this. Some guy just started a saw in my neighborhood. What the hell? All right. No respect for chemistry class. All right, there you go. That's how you would round it. All right, so with that, I'm going to show you 1 or 2 more. I don't know. I'm going to take a pause and flip to another side. That'll give me a chance to wait for this guy to finish sawing, whatever the heck he's sawing. I don't know. All right, so I'll show you a couple more on the next slide. All right, the guy quit sawing, so I guess I can move on. So what I would encourage you again, you really get a lot more out of this stuff the more you practice. So I'm going to put up a couple. You might want to pause the video, try them, and then I'll go over them in just a minute. So let's do a couple. Let's try a couple last ones. Multiplying and dividing. Find the number with the least amount of sig figs. Round to that in your answer. So we'll call this A and B on this page, I guess. So let's try, we haven't done one with dividing. So let's do one with dividing. 4.0 divided by 405. And then while we're at it, let's do one more. We'll call this one B, I suppose. How about 55.897? Oops, that got messed up there. That's a 7. Oh, there we go. Better. That's a 7. Times 28. What does that equal? So again, maybe bust out your calculator, try it out, see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and keep going over it, but it wouldn't hurt for you to try it on your own. All right. So if you type in this first one, what your calculator is going to say, if you type it incorrectly, be careful. Don't want to make any silly math mistakes. You should be getting this on your calculator. And if you look at it, it has a redunculous number of digits. Holy cow. That's what my calculator said. Filled up the whole screen. That's way too many. Right? So what I got to do is I got to round that thing correctly. So you look at the numbers you're given, find how many sig figs are in them. 4.0, how many sig figs? 2, right? Trailing 0 with the decimal counts. 2 sig figs. 405, how many sig figs? Captive 0 counts. 3 sig figs. All right, how many should be in your answer? 2, right? So after you do 2, you would then have to round your answer to those 2. So what that means is you're going to go over 2 places, 2 sig figs, and round right there. That means that sig fig number 1, oh, that's not the 0. Sig fig number 1 is the 9, and then the 8 is sig fig number 2. So I'd round after the 8. I'm going to round right here. Now that next number is a 7. So time to bump it up. You're going to make that 8. You got to turn it into a 9, don't you? So it should go like this. It should be 0.0099. Decimal right there. All right. Let's try one more. Second one, you type in your calculator. Calculator is going to spit out a redunculous number of digits. Well, actually not that many this time. 1565.116. Well, that's a lot of sig figs. I guess that's like 7. 7 is more than we need though, right? So let's look at how many we used in the numbers. 5 sig figs in the first number. 2 in the second. You should give me 2 in the answer. So the way you'd round it to 2, right? You'd round between the 5 and the 6, I suppose. You'd round right here. Now this is a 6, so you got to go up. So you would round this to 1 6. 1 6. That look right? I think you have a little issue, don't you? Because the original number is like over 1,000. It's 1,565. So when you're done rounding, if you start off with 1,565.116, you wouldn't round it to 16. You round it to 1,600. So that's a case where you need to add the zeros. Doesn't happen all the time. Usually only happens when there's a big number and you're trying to keep it a big number. And basically what you do is you turn everything to that decimal point into zeros to keep the size about the same. All right. There's one more rule I want to show you. And then, like I said, we'll have a chance to practice this in Zoom too, but you got to kind of at least be familiar with it, right? So, and that rule is there's a different rule for adding, subtracting. So the rule for adding and subtracting is different. If you want to round it correctly and you're not multiplying, dividing, you're adding and subtracting, you find the number with the least amount of decimal places. Notice that I did not say sig figs, and you will round to the same number of decimal places in your answer. So you still go by the least amount, but we're going to go by the least amount of decimal places now. All right, let me show you a couple. I'm adding these two. 8, oh, that's an 8 there. 856.9. I'm going to add it to 835.23. Let's make that an 8. 28123. All right, you put it in your calculator. That's that mess there is an 8. Sorry. All right, you put it in your calculator. Your calculator spits out this 1701.18123. So what you do is you look at the numbers you're using and you count out the decimal places. So the top one has 1 digit after the dot, 1 decimal place. The second one has 5 digits after the decimal place. You go by the least amount. That means I only want 1 digit after my decimal place. I would round right here between the 1 and the 8. Now, that 8 means I got to go up, right? So we would round up to 1701.2. All right, so there's still a different rule for rounding. So adding and subtracting, it's not quite as much because you don't have to worry about sig figs, which is nice. But you got to remember, oh, this is a different rule. I go by decimal places. All right, let me just show you one more. All right, one more. Let's do this one. 45.12 plus 6.899. You punch that in your calculator. Your calculator is going to tell you this. 52.019. So I'm going to round that answer though, right? Every number you're going to give me from now on is going to be rounded. So the way you'd round it, look at the numbers I gave you, go by decimal places. 2. 3 digits after the decimal. How many should be in your answer? 2. You're going to round right here. Now this is a 9, so we got to go up, right? We're going to go up again. So I only want 2 digits in my answer, so it should be 52.02. All right, with that, Hopefully this makes sense. If not, you can email me, you can call me, you can talk to me in my Zoom hours, and we'll get a little more practice on this. Eventually, there'll be homework on it. And like I said, man, this is one of these topics where if it doesn't make sense, it can haunt you because it might be way down the line in the 10th week of school and you type in some answer or you send me some answer or whatever, you're doing some quiz, who knows? And if you don't answer it with the right number of digits, you might get counted off for that. Might count off for that? I can't talk anymore. All right, might get it counted off. Might count off. Whatever. You get the idea. All right, have a good day. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time. That's it for this series of lectures on sig figs.